What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on a mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Rebecca Sutherns, the author of Nimble Facilitation. And that's exactly what our conversation is about, Nimble Facilitation on on-site workshops and also in the virtual world. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, why don't you visit workshop.work and download my one-page summary. Enjoy the show. Hello, Rebecca.
Hello, Miriam.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And I'm excited to talk to you about mostly the topic of your book, Nimble Facilitation, and the story behind and the story within and the story around it, especially in these times of remote. Yeah. And maybe we start with the very first question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
I love how you worded the question, because when I started facilitating and when I started calling myself a facilitator are two different dates. So I've been doing the work for 25, 26 years, probably started calling myself that, 20 years ago, something like that, 5 or 6 years in. And then another 5 or 6 years after that, probably started really marketing myself in the world as that. So it's been a gradual transformation of my own understanding of the centrality of that piece of the work to my work.
How did you call yourself before that?
Oh, mostly a mom, if that was, truthfully. Well, and partly I was using facilitative skills in my work in international development initially in my career. And then I was home with lots of kids. We've got 4 kids and I was busy with them. And I was basically probably a freelancer, contractor, people calling me with individual projects. And literally, if I could find space on my calendar and some childcare, I would do it. And that lasted a long time. And certainly I would have described facilitation as one of the services I provided. Mm-hmm. But thinking of myself primarily professionally as a facilitator took almost some forensics afterwards to say, what are people most often asking me to do? Which pieces of work are giving me the most energy? Because my CV looked a mess. It was all kinds of opportunistic things when the phone happened to ring and I happened to be available. And so I think the intentionality around facilitation as a rule came later. And in fact, I didn't get certified as a professional facilitator until about, I don't even know, maybe 9 years ago, something like that. So I was well into my career at that point because I'm in year 23 or 24 of my own business. So I had done this for a long time before I actually sort of attached myself to a community of people who do it and got some credentials and got some additional professional development. So it's certainly been a gradual unfolding of that role.
Yeah. And what prompted you to then take the step to get accredited?
It ended up being more of a professional development hunger for me than it was something that I thought would generate work. So it wasn't a business development decision. It's not like my clients were asking for it, although increasingly I am seeing that. It was more of a hunger in me to make sure that I was staying at the top of my game, and that through the International Association of Facilitators, that seemed to be a good path at that time to make sure of that in some ways. And only in hindsight can I say that it really was a great professional development opportunity and has continued to be as I've plugged into their learning opportunities and professional development conferences stuff. But at the time, it allowed me to document and really be conscious of what I knew. It's a certification that is experience-based and skills-based. You don't have to just take a course and fill in a form or something. You have to demonstrate you have a certain proficiency at facilitation and describe it and document that and sort of codify it. And it helped me see some gaps too of where I hadn't done a lot of professional development. When I finished my PhD, I jokingly say that I didn't read another book or enroll for another course for almost a decade. And it's a bit of an exaggeration, but only a little bit. I was pretty done. And so I think getting my certification prompted a new wave of curiosity and professional sharpening in me that I hadn't seen in a while.
Yeah. And I like the introspection aspect that you mentioned, that by going through their procedure, you saw the gaps that you wanted to fill, and also that you saw how you developed actually what might not have been so clear to you at the first sight.
Yeah. And I think it gave me a chance to see a bit of a narrative to that, where each individual project can seem unrelated because they don't come to me, connected to each other. But when I actually sort of was able to have a reason to look at the whole body of work as a piece, I could see that learning trajectory and perhaps the impact, in a new way, because you don't, unless you create them for yourselves when you're self-employed, you don't necessarily have that same kind of career path or learning path visible in front of you.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And what is the story behind Nimble Facilitation? Why did you write this book?
I wrote it because my experience with facilitation training, both taking it and offering it, didn't match my experience closely enough. And I felt like there was a gap, because most facilitation training I knew of was tools-based, learn how to run this activity in the room, or maybe design-based, here's how to put a few activities together in a row to do something. But my experience was showing me that the skill that I was bringing into the room that I was finding most helpful, and I think my groups were, was the skill of being able to adjust and respond and adapt. Mm-hmm. And I didn't see a lot of training that talked about that. And I was surprised by that in some ways, because I think that represents a very high percentage of what goes on in a facilitated space. And you can have the best toolkit in the room. I picture it being like the cyclist that has the best gear, but gets really tired really fast, or the, somebody who wants to get really good at home renovation, so goes out to the hardware store and buys the sparkliest, shiniest red toolbox and puts all the best tools in it and can't hammer a nail, And I felt like that hammering a nail piece is what you do on site, in the room, in the moment. And then it caused me to think about what made that skill in the room possible. Was it only experience? Was it, I've done this for 20 years now, therefore I know? Or was that skill actually teachable? So I set about starting to figure out how you teach something that I had learned through experience, and is it possible that you can learn it ahead of that experience or in the midst of that experience, not just retrospectively? And I thought you could. And so started to do that in workshops, and then gradually morphed that into a book.
And now, what would you put in the center? So what is the core skill that you would teach in order to be able to do this?
Great question. I think preparation. I think people think that being a Nimble facilitator is about what happens in the room. And what I'm learning is that I think it's way more about what happens before that. But I don't mean that it's only about making a very detailed facilitation plan, because I think people can be equally poorly prepared if they are over prepared as if they are under. And so I talk in the book about whether you tend toward one side of that or the other. But I think the preparation that I'm talking about as being the core skill is awareness and anticipation. And what I mean by that is knowing your own tendencies, meaning you either tend to either over prepare or under. And then also anticipation, meaning, are you getting better at anticipating what is likely to happen in the room? Because one of my core assertions, I guess, in the book is that there's lots of reasons why things will go off the rails. Make sure your own lack of preparation isn't one of them. You don't want to be contributing to whatever disasters might befall you in the room. And that's what I mean about preparation being important ahead of time. The more you can accurately anticipate what is likely to happen, and also make sure that you appear in that room at your best and doing whatever preparation you personally need to make sure your state is as positive and ready as it can be, that's the kind of showing up that's going to make the in the room nimbleness more possible.
Yeah. And I hear self-awareness.
Yeah, because all kinds of reasons. I think if someone says to me, I've got a big workshop tomorrow, what should I do to prepare? Truly, my answer is go to bed early, right? It's get a good night's sleep, be at your best in the room. So there's the what I consider the sort of basic physiological things. Are you hydrated? Are you well fed? Are you rested? Then there's the preparation things of, have you done what you can to be ready from a, are we clear on the objectives and the process you've designed, and is everything at your fingertips? But I think more deeply than that, there is a self-awareness around two things. One is who you are in that space. So whether you are a highly energetic or more introspective facilitator, whether your identity in the room from a power dynamic point of view will affect the room in particular ways. Not just whether it will, but how will it? Mm-hmm. And then also from a temperament point of view, to say, wow, I tend to be pretty spontaneous and winging it, and that's kind of not helping in this case. I should have been a little more scripted, or vice versa. I tend to be very scripted, and therefore my best thing is to loosen my grip on that script. So I think that self-awareness, the more work I do in this area and the more I talk and speak and teach about this topic, the more I'm realizing that that inner work is what allows you to do the outer work. So the preparation I'm talking about is that, as well as the more mechanical stuff that goes into design that then leads you to be ready. And it does have a bit of a dark side, because I think if you are hyper prepared, the likelihood is that you will enjoy your, in a sense, imaginary script that never happened, never was going to happen. And you might be tempted to say, but my imagined way of this unfolding would have been so much better than what actually happened. That doesn't serve your group terribly well. Mm-hmm. So I find myself saying to people, what you meant to do or what you hoped would happen doesn't matter at all. What only matters to people is what happened in the room. So in that sense, those nimble skills do happen in the room, but a bunch of it happens ahead of time in being well prepared, but then also loosening your tight grip on your preparation enough that when you walk in the room, it's that inner personal preparation that serves you best, not your scripting of the process of that day. That's going to be most helpful to you, I think, when you get in front of the group.
Yeah. And that's where then the self-awareness comes back in, because just by knowing how you react in a room and how much preparation you actually need and what makes you thrive best, and being blunt honest about that, then helps you to really prepare.
I think so. I think you also have an obligation to your client too, though, in that I'm learning that perhaps I personally, especially the more I do this, the less tightly I need to prepare and the more flexible I want things to be. And yet my clients aren't always at that same point themselves. And my obligation is not just to do what I need, but to do what they need. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I'm providing more detail to them in advance to keep their stress level low, because that's part of the service I provide. It's not because I need that. It's because they need that. And I think I went through a patch where I wasn't as attuned to that. And I was doing what I needed to prepare in the room. And I wasn't finding a place where I was doing what I need, but I was also doing what they needed me to do for them in service to them as my client.
And to what extent would this restrict you then to Nimble once you are in the space? Because I can imagine if you're providing if you have this kind of client who wants a lot of control and clarity, so they want a very detailed agenda, and then in the middle of the session you realize, oh, I actually need to dump the agenda.
Yeah.
How do they react, and how do you prepare them for that?
I love your question, because I think it actually is about preparation. And I find myself saying things like, I will provide the agenda you're asking for. Here it is. The likelihood of me following this agenda is low, and that will serve all of us better. So if this agenda, if I've proven to be 100% accurate in my anticipation skills based on my experience and what you've told me of your group, this agenda will unfold as it says. And if I think something else is needed, I can prepare maybe 60% of the way, and the other 40% is going to happen in the room. So it's about preparing them. It's giving them the reassurance that I am as prepared as any human reasonably could be, but that the extra value I add is by saying, and if this isn't the most helpful thing to do, we will try to do the most helpful thing, and we won't know what that is until we get in the room. Or I'll say, I think this piece will take this long, but if it ends up being very contentious or just not as consensual as we thought, it might take longer, in which case I've built in some time here. Like I show them where the breathing space is so that they can, I'm assuming if they're a client that needs that level of detail, it helps to also say here and here and here on this detailed agenda are where I will catch up or where I will make up some time or whatever it is if things go differently. And I think just having them hear me explain that, they know that I've thought it through, and therefore I'm hopeful that that builds trust so that in the room it's okay. And they don't very often insist that I stick to the script in the room. But the other tip I would have around that is I might be willing to provide them with high detail if they ask for it. But I ask them not to provide that level of high detail to the participants. So what goes out publicly to the group is not the same as what I do. And what the client gets is sometimes in between those two.
Makes total sense. It's funny, it reminded me so much of the preparation process for a podcast interview. So in the very beginning when I started, I scripted every question and I had an entire kind of flow. And then I realized that I was so focused on the questions that I wanted to ask that I didn't have the capacity and the headspace to actually really follow the conversation and then to dig deeper whenever it was necessary. So what I do today is I still provide some key questions to my future guests, but I always say, I might or might not ask these questions depending on where the conversation takes us. And it happened only once to me that a guest said, but you're not asking me the question that you sent me.
Well, and that makes it about them, right? At that point, you see what level of preparation. I think it's all about lowering anxiety. Yeah. So for some people, lowering anxiety comes from high preparation, and for others, it comes from looseness. Personally, if I read a really detailed agenda, it makes me hyperventilate. Like it's stressful to me. I think I can't follow that, whereas somebody else, they see my really loose agenda and they're like, you are not ready. And so I feel like there's a bit of that. And I think also one of my little mini crusades, I think, is against being the oblivious facilitator, or in your case, the oblivious podcast interviewer, right? I think over preparation makes it about us instead of making it about the guest or the group. And that's what I'm trying to find, is that sweet spot that says, be ready, but make it not about you. And I think sometimes the oblivious facilitator, we know that they're the oblivious facilitator because it becomes about them. Either because we're not, do you ever have that experience where the group feels like they're not following the facilitator's script? As if they somehow are doing something wrong because they didn't follow this thing that came out of that person's head.
Yeah. And suddenly there's judgment in the room, and then there's this anxiety of, we are not coming up with the right solution. Although the difference between a facilitator and a trainer is that there is no right solution. It depends on the group's needs.
Exactly. And I think a facilitator can make the group feel like they're getting it wrong if they're not sticking to that script. But similarly, you don't want a facilitator that is so spontaneous that you're kind of getting the vibe as the group that your safari guide does not know where she's going. Like that doesn't make anybody feel relaxed either, right? It's like, so what do you want to do now is not what I want my facilitator saying over and over again in the room, or I don't want them to be as lost or stuck or unable to see a way forward as we are. That's why we're hoping that they're there, is to help us navigate our way through complexity. I mean, yes, we all have moments as facilitators that we get muddled, but you don't want that to be the norm of, the person at the front of the room saying, so, what do you all think we should do? Yeah. So I think that's where this came from for me, was trying to articulate and make conscious even for myself, what the steps are that I take to find that sweet spot, ranging from that personal preparation, the meeting preparation, and then the skills in the room to read what's going on. And then even afterwards to close that loop well with myself and with the group, and learn from that in some intentional ways so that next time things are even better. So I feel like there is that full circle of before, during, and after, but the emphasis is on before.
So how do you go about this closure of the session?
one of the things, I mean, some of it happens in the room of trying to close it well. And I find that a challenge actually, because it seems that no matter what time you say to people that the meeting will be over, and I always end early, people check out even earlier than that. So there is a bit of a dynamic of finishing on a strong note, to the point that sometimes I tell them other end times that I might have a different end time in my head earlier, never later, so that they're not packing up too soon. So there's some dynamics in the room. But what I was actually thinking of was even afterwards, I think we can be very hard on ourselves about how things went, partly because we did have a script. And so we're like, oh, I didn't do that, or I meant to do this. And basically what you meant to do doesn't matter at all, like I said before. So I want people to be checking in and saying, how do you think that went? And how do you know? Are you only checking in with yourself about how it went? Are you triangulating that information from the participants, from your client, maybe from a co-facilitator who was with you in that experience? And are we giving more attention, as our brains are prone to do, to the negative voices, or are we giving balanced attention to the full range of feedback we're getting? And then do we have systems in place to learn from that? So one little trick, for example, that I'm starting to get better at is my script or facilitation plan that I have for a meeting. I'm trying to go back to it after the meeting and write version 2.0 of what actually happened. Yeah. And then I'm saving both. So that way, if I facilitate a similar session again another day, I'm not going back to the imaginary script. I'm going back to what actually happened, as well as to what I wish had happened or what I thought would, and combining the learnings from both. Because it's very possible for me to say, oh, what I'd planned there actually would have served us better. I wish I made that choice in the moment. But in other ways, I say, oh, I made this different choice, and here's why, and that actually worked out well. So it is a series of choices and trade-offs in the moment. When we're in the room, that's the skill, is making quick decisions based on a lot of inputs. And so I think the multitasking cognitive capacity that you need in the room is high as a facilitator. And you're making decisions. And I think that's a muscle that we can, in a sense, strengthen over time, that helps us make better and better decisions. And I think what I'm noticing right now, as we're moving to an exclusively digital facilitation space, is that we still have to multitask. And we know from other research that our brains aren't great at that. But we're having to multitask on different channels in different ways than we had to before. So in some ways, there's some muscle memory for experienced facilitators in that. But in other ways, it's a different set of demands on us. But what I'm noticing also is that our participants need to multitask in more ways than they might have to were they in the room. So not only that many of them have their children at home and their pets walking through the screen and all of that, but it's also they are reading the chat and they are sort of juggling the conversation and reading. So for example, I was with a group lately who responded with silence to a question I'd asked, and I thought the question was a pretty relevant one to them. I would have thought they'd have a lot to say about it. And it was silent. And when I checked in with them, it was early in the pandemic shutdown days, but they said, Rebecca, we are listening to you. We are reading your slides. We are reading the chat. We are thinking about the question you asked us, and we're typing the answer. Give us a sec, And I thought, oh yeah, I'm used to that pace of multiple things coming at me, and I process quickly, and I'm used to that from the front of the room. They're not used to that mostly. And so I need to allow for the fact that nimbleness is being asked of our participants right now, not just of us. And that's why I'm really exploring this idea of nimble leadership and nimble thinking and nimble strategizing, not just nimble facilitation. I think that the current environment is asking that of us in a way that we've never experienced before.
Do you ever feel you're tired of the trip from home to the home office? That the physical confines of your house are not getting you the exposure to the new ideas that you need? Maybe you need Mastermind. At Mastermind, you work together with a group of peers who help you bring new perspectives to your challenges, to find new solutions, and who you can even give a little bit back to by helping them solve their problems. In a compressed 2 hours, you'll get a day's worth of learning. So why don't you get out of that box and come to Mastermind? workshops.work/mastermind.
I also wanted to make the transition and ask about the virtual space, because I experienced that participants need much more structure now in the virtual workshop room. And it's far more difficult to actually, nimble in it, especially if you're working with digital whiteboards or in digital workshop rooms and not only in the video conference. What is your experience? Would you rather stick to the script now?
That's a good question. I think there's a few layers of this. I think that the mechanics of digital took a while for people to get used to. And I feel like they're gradually getting the hang of it if they're spending any time on Zoom right now. Mm-hmm. So, where's my mute button? How do I find the whiteboard? Where's the chat? All that stuff. I'm hearing that a little less now. And now we can start looking at dynamics in the room. And I've been writing a bit about the dynamics that I'm noticing. So, for example, I think there's an interesting reach and accessibility that comes from having online work. So we can access anybody from anywhere in the world. And we always could, but we weren't. And they weren't home. Now they're here and we can bring anybody into a workshop. So I love that reach. And I also love, in some ways, the fact that each of us takes up equal space in the room. We each get our own little rectangle on the screen, and you really can't take up more than that. And so that is a loss and a gain in some ways. I think it equalizes power in a new way, but it also means that the physicality of being together is quite different. In terms of your question around more structured things, I think that will be the next learning edge for us, is to be more comfortable with silence, more comfortable with ambiguity in the room, more tools that let us be a bit messier. So, for example, right now, I'm starting to use my iPad and draw things much more than I'm using pre-prepared slides, but it's still not the same as being able to hand the pen or marker to the participants and let them mess around. And they can, but that's another learning curve for them. And I'm conscious of not wanting to ask them to learn too many things at once, because sometimes that learning curve uses up cognitive space that is already super limited right now. And so I feel like our cognitive load is so high at the moment that we need to guard our own and our participants' decision-making capacity and learning capacity very closely, so that we're only asking them to make decisions and learn what we really need them to. So I don't want to play with too many new things if doing so isn't that essential, because I think it takes up battery in a sense.
Yeah, totally.
That they don't have.
Totally. I can very much relate to that, because recently, so I started using Mural a lot, which is basically a virtual workshop room. And what I love about it is that the sticky notes don't fall off the wall. So after the workshop, the impossible is possible, that everyone can go back at their own pace, revisit everything that's been there as it was left. So I think that's beautiful. But also I realized that depending on the time we have, it is so important for me to hold back and not to over-explain the tool and show them everything that is possible, because as you say, it takes up so much headspace and cognitive ability that I would rather want them to just use the bare minimum and to provide everything that they need, so that they just need to pick up the Post-it note and type on it. Although it could be very different, but I think it's this balance that we have to find. How much can we actually expect from the participants to really...
Yeah, and I think, all that we could do is not really all that we can do right now, because there's always that trade-off. If I teach them one new feature, they might think that's cool, but we've now used up some space in their head, used up some time on the clock. And I'm finding that on the clock time thing, we still need to add some extra time at the beginning of meetings. I mean, I would always include a little bit of a check-in process in some kind, but I feel like we need longer right now. I feel like people need to check in differently, particularly if you're working with teams that are used to being co-located and aren't right now. If I, as an outside facilitator, when I come in, I'm used to being the only new one in the room and they've seen each other that day or that week. Right now, that's not true. Nobody's seen anybody. So they need time to have their casual, hey, how you doing conversations that have nothing to do with me, if they haven't already been seeing each other. And I think also we are all to varying degrees traumatized by what we're going through right now. And people need to process this. There's grieving and disappointment and adjusting and shock and whatever. And so that takes up a chunk of both mind capacity and time on the clock that I think as facilitators we need to allow for. And then you also have stamina issues online, which are less. Mm-hmm. And we don't cover quite as much online as we do in the room unless we use highly structured processes, which may or may not generate more. So I'm finding overall that we can cover less ground for lots of reasons. And so what I would cover in a day, I've already compressed into 3 hours instead of 6 hours together. And then even in those 3 hours, we're actually getting through maybe 2/3 of that time. So I just can't get through quite as much. And yet I'm also seeing some advantages, right? People are really looking each other in the eye when they talk to them, and they can't interrupt one another. And as I said, they can only take up a certain amount of space, and we have access to everybody around the world. And there are conferences that I'm attending now that I never would have been able to afford to attend before. So I'm not grieving that piece of it. I'm trying to lean into the advantages of it, but also recognize that it is exhausting. I mean, yesterday at the end of my day, I didn't think I'd had that busy a day. I mean, I literally sat at my desk all day and talked to people on screens, and I was exhausted. And so I need to remember, I think we all do, there's all kinds of factors that are contributing to our fatigue right at the moment. And I think we need to be kind to one another about that and to ourselves.
Yeah. What do you think can we learn from this experience that we might take back into the on-site workshop space?
I feel like it's really hard to be reflective about your learning when you're right in the middle of a story, right? And I know that we're right in the middle of a story. But having said that, and if I limit your question just to that facilitation space, because there's so much we could say about what we want to learn about our whole lives and rhythm and planet and everything. But I think overall, this is going to land in a much more hybrid place. So for example, something very practical. If I say to a client, hey, they say to me, we need to get together next week. And I say, do you need me to come in, or do you want to do that remotely? I think more often than before, they will say, yeah, we can just do that remotely. So I think particularly for small, short, maybe repetitive things, we will rely on virtual more comfortably than we did before. I think there was resistance to it before, and this has forced a learning curve in all of us that has allowed us to say, yeah, virtual will do, because we're saving a bunch of money on one hand, and we're getting pretty good at virtual. We're sort of used to it now. And so I think there will be more virtual facilitation, and people will be the default is switching. Mm-hmm. So people will be more deliberate about whether we need an in-person event, but therefore when we have one, I think it'll be amazing, because people will know that they've chosen it. They will have missed it, and so they'll appreciate it. We will use it for what it's really good at. But I think we will notice, surprisingly, as much as that was our home base before for most of us, I think we will notice the limitations of it. Mm-hmm. And we will miss, ironically, some of this digital engagement, I suspect. So I think it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, because it really strikes me what you said about the amount of space, that everyone takes up the same amount of space and that we don't interrupt each other. And I wonder, I cannot imagine that it's only from the fact that we mute and unmute ourselves, because I have realized that even if the entire group is unmuted, interruption doesn't happen as often. And we seem to be more thoughtful. And I wonder whether it's this current compassion that we're in this situation together, or is it something that goes beyond that?
Yeah, because I think there's probably levels, right? I mean, there's something about just the functionality of Zoom that literally does not allow two people to talk at the same time. So that if you interrupt, you're taking the microphone away from someone else. So if you're in a room physically and someone had to speak on a mic, it wouldn't occur to most of us to literally take the microphone out of their hand, right? Someone might talk over top of them, but they wouldn't snatch the mic. Yeah. In Zoom, you have to snatch the mic because Zoom doesn't allow two people to speak at the same time. So I feel like people are self-censoring a little because of that. Self-control is different. But I also do think that's situated in an overall context of a higher level of compassion and patience and kindness that I'm seeing. And I don't know how long that will last. We have short memories as a species, I think, and I hope it will last longer, but then it probably will. But there is an element of we're all in this together. And I see it from the point of view of, previously, if one of us had one of our children at home and that child came and interrupted a meeting because they were homesick or something, we would be super apologetic because we are the exception, right? Isn't your child supposed to be at school or daycare or something? Now, everybody's got kids at home, parents, pets, whatever. So people are just, that's the new normal. And I suspect things like that will last a little bit too, where if someone has to do a juggle, we've all been doing a juggle. And I see it with friends that are working. I do a lot of work with social service agencies and people who live on low income. And the experience, unfortunately, of living on low income is becoming more broadly shared right now, of people saying, my work has dried up, it has disappeared. I think that's making us more compassionate too, because, people can more easily say, through no fault of our own, this has happened to us. And that has a very different posture toward people who are struggling. And so I see a generosity of spirit out of shared experience that I hadn't seen before. And I'm assuming that that's seeping into our workshop rooms. I hope it is.
Yeah. And I think also something that you mentioned before, that we suddenly see each other. So we look in each other's eyes and we see the background. So we get a glimpse of the personal side of each other, which also might add to the compassion.
I think so. I've had a couple of interesting interactions about that. One was someone who works in a very hierarchical, formal environment and was very uncomfortable with this new reality because they just didn't want people seeing their homes or to have to see into somebody else's. And I think there's ways around that. I mean, we have these virtual backgrounds and other things, but I think it's another way that the power dynamic is shifting to a more, I don't know, if it's not more equitable, then at least it's a more compassionate space. Where I live in Canada, there's issues for that for educators because school boards have all kinds of privacy rules about not being able to see inside kids' homes. And it's causing the pedagogy to be worse, in my opinion, because they're not using video the way they could, because they feel like they're not allowed to. So that's an interesting dynamic, but I saw it in a more positive way. I was at an event recently that would normally in real life, in former times, have been kind of a wine and cheese mingling networking kind of event. And doing it on Zoom meant that it made it feel like a circle. Like you wouldn't put people in a circle in a wine and cheese event. We would have been in a cafe. You would chat with a couple people that are sitting near you or that you happen to already know. This way, everyone was looking at everybody's faces. One person talked at a time, but everyone got to hear everyone. And people said, that was way better because I got to hear, I didn't feel like I was missing out on the conversation over there. We all had one conversation, which in a cafe, we would not have done that. We wouldn't have, had one person speaking at a time with everyone giving their full attention to that one person and taking turns. It would have been multiple small conversations. But you lose it in other ways. So as a facilitator, I notice it with small group work. I can't lurk. I can't watch the subtle dynamics in a small group with more than one group at a time without the group seeing me do it. For me to join a breakout room, I am there and I interrupt. When I show up in that room, they stop. Whereas in real life, I keep saying that, this is real life too. In in-person life, I can listen in from a distance without being obtrusive to them. And I can also pay attention to multiple groups at once. Yeah. And that's a gift that I will appreciate getting back. Yeah. And another one that I'm missing is the variety of venues, because I use venue as a creative lever, as a creative planning variable. They make meetings and workshops better if you can put them in a creative venue. And right now we don't have that option quite the same way. Yeah. So I miss that. I feel like there's pieces that make the facilitation experience harder since we're all using the same platform and have to be in the same space all the time. But I think there's, like with anything, it's about mindset because you choose what to focus on. And if I say I get to facilitate virtually, what does that allow me to do? Mm-hmm. I'm in a very different space than if I feel like it's consolation prize in plan B,
Totally. And I think the venues, we have so many options to vary the tools we use in order to bring in this variation of venue and this of course it's not the same, but I think we have some possibilities there. And to come back to the breakout groups, although it's more difficult from the point of view of the facilitator, I totally get that. On the other hand, I have the impression that the small group discussions go so much deeper just because of the fact that nobody can listen to them. So it's really, so you snip them out and then they are in this small group with full attention to each other without getting FOMO of the other tables, or maybe the other groups they're much more productive, or why are they laughing and we are not laughing?
It's true. I think that
you're facilitating with them and not with us.
Yeah, you're not that FOMO and not being overheard, like the privacy almost.
Yeah,
it is probably offsetting the lurking.
Yeah, I always ask the question, what makes a workshop fail? And I would like to hear your opinion whether there are different attributes that would make a workshop fail if you're on site as opposed to virtual.
I always think about success, if I can flip it that way, as a content issue and a process issue and an experience issue. So if I think about the content, like did we get through or make the decision or generate the thing? The process point of view, did we do it in a way that was the most effective or well-aligned or productive? And what did it feel like to be part of that? Was it a positive experience? Was it generative and life-giving, or did it feel terrible? And I think if those three things are important to us, I think they're just as important online as in person. I think maybe the reasons why we might not score as highly on each of those three might be different on any given day, but I don't very often think about, and this isn't sort of an anti-failure thing, I don't think about failure, but I was thinking about your question in the sense of, would I consider any workshop a failure? And I think because I'm evaluating them on multiple assessment points, they are rarely a failure. I might say, we did better on this aspect than we did on this other aspect, but it was, good on this one. So I think if we're assessing our experience and performance and group dynamics and whatever it is on multiple data points, it would be very rare that all of them would be a disaster. And similarly, who gets to decide that? I mentioned this earlier. I think I would be very hard on myself, harder than my clients would be or than my groups would be. But other times we know from research on meetings actually that there's a fairly new book out called The Surprising Science of Meetings that people, the people running the meetings always think they go better than the people that are in them, right? Very humbling. Yeah, it's terrible. So I want to acknowledge that too, that as much as I might be hard on myself, chances are I want to think better of the whole experience. And that I think is partly because we know our intentions, right? We know what we meant to do. We know why we did certain things, what we had in mind. And our participants don't always know that, and they don't even care. They just know what happened for them. And similarly, they've got a whole bunch of other dynamics that we don't know anything about. So fail why, fail for whom, fail from whose opinion, So I don't know. I don't want to skirt the question, but I also don't know if I find it the most helpful one.
I love your answer. I think for me, it's always interesting to hear what comes out when I ask someone for a failed workshop, because there are so many layers to it and it really shows a different perspective. Whereas when I ask for a successful workshop, the answers are less various.
Yeah. I wonder if that's true. I wonder if when we phrase questions negatively or provocatively, if we actually get more interesting answers, more varied answers. I love that.
Yeah. I guess it depends.
Yeah.
Also, I think I like pre-mortems and thinking of how can we fail or what would cause a failure leaves us more room for creative action. So if I know, okay, failure is if the wrong people are in the room, then I can think, okay, who are actually the right people to get into the room? Whereas when I'm told, okay, a workshop is successful if you have ABC in the room, then my option is ABC.
Yes. Yeah, great point. And I think that's that skill of anticipation I was talking about before, that if that question leads us to anticipate more thoroughly and better, then I think that's great. And I think also planning for multiple scenarios is really good for us. And I think sometimes people get scenario planning confused with meaning that they have to, like if plan A doesn't happen, plan B has to happen. And I don't feel like that. I feel like by planning for A and B and then C or K or L happen, your brain goes, oh yeah, I remember this. We were talking about the fact that it might not go the way we thought. I can adjust. And I think it's not about getting the scenario right.
But building synapses and the nimble mindset.
Yeah, it's building capacity in your brain to acknowledge that your plan is not going to happen. And so it's about expectations. There's a great new resource that came out last week called Brace for Impact. Mm-hmm. And it's a book by two colleagues of mine in Australia about coping with the pandemic from a performance point of view, from a psychological point of view. And they did a half-hour webcast thing just last night. I was listening to Brace for the Week, it was called. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about the importance of managing our expectations and that our experiences are very much tied to those expectations, even our physiological responses. And so if we can condition our bodies to expect accurately, we are likely to feel better in the moment, because our dopamine in particular is the hormone that sort of rises and falls based on expectations, and it can surge or plummet. And if we can keep it even in the room, I'm loving learning about sort of these physiological underpinnings of the emotional and experiential things that we already maybe knew about a little more consciously. So yeah, managing our expectations ahead of time and in the room, I think is important. And part of what Nimble says is things will go differently than you planned. That's normal. That's to be expected. And in fact, that's to be desired, because if you're dealing with humans and you are human, you don't want it to be so robotic and scripted that it goes exactly as you thought. Yeah. Or you don't want to be controlling it so tightly that the reason it goes as you thought is because you made it happen. You know, you forced it that way.
Yeah.
Again, you made it about you, and it's not about you.
What I like about how you put the Nimble facilitation, for me, it's a combination between mindset and skill set.
Yes, I love that.
So it's this middle ground where it's neither only one or the other.
And isn't that always true? Like, I feel like that's always true about lots of things.
Yeah. What is your favorite exercise that you do?
There's lots I love, but the one I use most often, so I don't know if it's my favorite because it's the most versatile and therefore useful to me, is I draw a continuum, just a line, a spectrum on a flip chart or an iPad, and ask people to situate themselves on it based on whatever the thing is. So it can be used from the basis of, a general check-in, how you doing, to a very specific, hey, that person said that this is taking us, that this piece of work is terrible. Do you think it's terrible or amazing? Or we said we wanted this strategy to be inspiring and useful. Here's an inspiring scale. Here's a useful scale. 1 to 10, how close are we on, is it inspiring yet? Is it useful yet? Whatever it is. So there's lots of ways. So you get to pick the poles of the spectrum, how you label either end. So it can be very specific, or it could just be a happy face and a sad face, or a check mark and an X. It's got a lot of versatility that way. And then what happens is people put their X up there, and it does, one risk with it is that it's in person, it's not anonymous. Online, it can be. Mm-hmm. But then once it's filled in, I ask the group to interpret what they see. So I talk about it being almost like a teeter-totter, that if we put a fulcrum in the middle, would it tip to the right or to the left? And what it shows us is it a yes or no? It shows which way the teeter-totter tips, but it shows by how much and how aligned are we. So if everyone's answers are at one side, that tells us something compared to if the answers are spread across, or if they are very bipolar. So it shows us visually, not verbally, but visually something. Mm-hmm. And then I can ask the group to interpret it. And so the meaning of it is made by the group, not by me. So it does all kinds of things really fast. Like we could do that in 5 minutes. I often have it, multiple ones of them drawn on a flip chart as people are heading out for coffee. Hey, throw an X up there as you go. And then we talk about it when they come back as a bit of a check-in of where we're at. So I use that when I do in-person exercises. I use it almost every time. Mm-hmm. And even online, it's something you can use very simply using the whiteboard and annotate features on Zoom, or I do it on a slide where people can annotate a slide very easily and just stick an X on something, and then the group all sees it and we can all talk about it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Love that. And we've been chatting for almost an hour already. I can't believe it. Is there anything that you wanted to share but we didn't get to?
I think one of the things that I'm really interested in, and it's the title of my blog is Wiser Decisions Faster. And one of the pieces I'm playing around with is what are the conditions under which collaborative decisions can be both wiser and faster. So in this newly virtual world, are there ways that that is more or less true? To what extent does a virtual world help us to make decisions that are wiser and or faster? Because I think there's a perception that collaborative decision-making is slow and a little bit vanilla, leads to the lowest common denominator kind of thinking. And I think that's the risk is there online and in person. So I'm not sure the format is the determining factor there, but that would be the other piece that I'm kind of bringing into this Nimble mix is to say, what can I be doing with a view always to achieving the purpose of whatever the group has set before itself, but also doing that at a very high quality and in a quick enough way that we're not wasting people's time. I don't set speed as a goal in and of itself, but our time is precious. People's stamina is limited. And therefore, how can we help collaboration be the quicker way of doing something? Often it is because you're going slowly at the beginning to go faster at the end with buy-in and that kind of thing. But even that idea of going slower at the beginning, does it have to be? Are there ways that we can be using some of these new tools to speed up decision-making even as we make it not only wiser, but also maybe more transparent and more inclusive?
And what I think the opportunity is that we don't have necessarily to work on everything synchronously. So the opportunity of asynchronous work, as I mentioned before, that you can come back to the workshop room and have a look at the sticky note that are still there at the same place. Or you can invite them to come before in order to prepare and do some prep tasks. I think this can help us to be better aligned and then really take to speed up faster because you start on the same page. On the other hand, from what you just described, I fear that there's less patience to really have these deep discussions that hurt online. And we have these phases in a conversation, in a workshop, where it really gets heated, it gets emotional. Everyone just wants to run away and leave and want this to be over. They're staying. And I think to go through this kind of struggle with a group that is not sharing the same oxygen is more difficult. So I wonder whether to go past the vanilla phase, I love vanilla, might be more difficult. Maybe that's then the next level of virtual facilitation.
I love that. I hadn't even thought of that, but I think it's true. And I don't even know why it's true yet in terms of why are we less willing. And maybe it is a space thing, like not just not sharing physical space. I led a workshop yesterday and I felt like that. I thought we're rushing, like we're rushing through the steps here, and I'm not letting people, we don't have time to let people sit with this. And so at the end, I was saying to them, it's part of an ongoing project. And I was saying, I think we need more time. And maybe it's time without me. Like maybe you guys need to go, and they were an internal team. And I said, maybe you need to go and do blah, blah, blah. And then we come back together, because I feel like somehow doing this, we felt like we were on the clock all the time. And strangely, when we're in-person gatherings, there's still the clock, there's still a time limit, but it feels less, I don't know, it's not even rushed, but maybe it is what you were saying before about being structured. And so, because it's not like people are just leaving if they don't want to have the conversation. We're not any more likely to just check out of these meetings as we would out of in-person ones, but it's harder to check out. I think part of it might be it's harder to just zone out, like to date, like there's not much daydreaming time in a Zoom meeting.
And I think the opportunity costs are higher. So if I walk out of a meeting, I still have to go to my office or to work. If I close my computer, maybe I could have some quality time with my family. So it's another relative allocation of value towards the time, and the willingness to invest more time in a meeting, I think, is lower because we have higher opportunity costs working from home.
Good point. And we're spending so much time in only one kind of meeting all the time, because anything we do on Zoom feels like the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I've been taking these online improv classes, which have been super fun. But what I said to them the first night was, I need this to feel different. I need it to feel like it's not yet another Zoom meeting in my day, because I've had 5 already and this is number 6. And I need this to be fun. And it's really hard to feel fun, even though what we're doing is fun.
Yeah.
So I wonder if part of it is just a lack of variety. I mean, I know personally I value variety really highly, so I'm sure it's coming from that place. But I think our willingness to feel like we're not using our time productively comes partly from Zoom fatigue too.
Yeah, very good point. Great food for thought.
Yeah, lots to think about. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Rebecca. If someone fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up and doesn't have time to listen to the entire show again, what would you like them to keep in mind?
Oh man, that's so hard. I'm going to pick up on something you said, and that is that nimbleness in the room is both a mindset and a skill set. And if you're interested in, digging more deeply and having more conversations about it, I would love to do that in other ways, because, can't do it justice in a sentence or 2.
Wonderful. I will put all the links to your book, to your profile, and your blog in the show notes. And
Terrific.
Then the audience can reach out to you.
That's great. And I've got another book coming out later this year, so hopefully we can have another conversation about that when it comes out.
Can't wait. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.